guys. Nobody's here yet. I hope you all get notifications because I don't know what StreamYard just tried to do to me. It was gaslighting me, telling me I had no internet. It would not load. Absolutely would not load for no reason. It just went kaput. It's telling me I am still live streaming on YouTube when I am not live streaming on YouTube. I'm live streaming a different live stream now on YouTube. That is not showing up yet. Hey, Jill. Welcome back. I don't know what StreamYard thought they were doing, but they decided to tell me I didn't have any internet at all. The page wouldn't load. It wouldn't reload. I rebooted my computer and it still wouldn't reload. Ugh. I thought I was going to have to call it quits for today. And now Court TV doesn't want to load. I don't know what is happening. Hey, Terry. I tried to test the internet, like the speed test thing. It said my router was offline. My router is not offline. I rebooted my router. I wonder if I am really having trouble with my internet today because it's taking everything forever to load. And I rebooted everything. The computer, the router, everything. I know my bill's paid. I pay my bill early. What in the world is going on today? I swear I don't know what's going on. Oh, there we go. Unfortunately, I gotta find where we left off. Okay, where were we? Let me figure out where. Okay, they just started talking. Oh, shoot. Okay, I think they had just. Well, it always tells me that it's disconnected, but then it comes back. But this time, no, it wasn't coming back. And I don't understand what was happening. Because I was the trial was still going. And it kept telling me that I had no internet, that the page couldn't be reloaded because I had no internet. And I was like, I have internet. And so then I went over and I rebooted the router. And while the router was rebooting, I could still play the trial, but it still wasn't reloading the StreamYard page. I was like, this is insane. Absolutely insane. It makes no sense. Right during the cross we've been waiting over 24 hours for this cross. And StreamYard decides to be a dick. Jeez. I think I'm around. They had just started talking about confirmation bias, right? So I think I am right around where that was. I might have to back up a little bit.
And other scientists doing studies?
So I'm not
in terms of the application of methodologies and principles. You would agree that's a pretty fundamental purpose of the scientific method is to avoid biases?
The purpose of the scientific method is to get the most logical and correct answer. without bias.
Exactly. Do it with apply the scientific method without bias being part of the application of the method, correct?
That's hopefully what you can do.
That's hopefully what you can do. That is the goal, right?
That is one of many goals, yes.
So are you familiar with the term confirmation bias?
I am.
And that relates, confirmation bias is part of a larger term. Are you familiar with cognitive bias?
Generally, I'm not a human factors expert, though.
Pardon me?
I'm not a human factors expert.
All right, this is, biases are, don't you agree that cognitive biases are not just for one category? You would agree it applies to medical analyses, it applies to doctors doing studies, engineers doing studies, and other scientists doing studies?
So I'm not a cognitive expert. I think I would generally agree with it, but I don't want to step out of my lane. I'm not an expert on cognitive. I can talk to you about confirmational bias, if you
Fair.
like.
Let's talk about
What
confirmation
is
bias.
cognitive bias?
Now, confirmation bias is actually when someone selectively gathers and interprets evidence to confirm one or another's beliefs, as well as neglecting evidence that contradicts those beliefs. Is that a fair statement of confirmation bias?
That is a statement. Yeah, it could be broader, but sure.
But you would agree that that is generally correct, what
Generally, yes.
confirmation bias is. And an example of confirmation bias is not considering alternative hypotheses once an initial hypothesis has been selected, even though data and information might contradict the initial hypothesis. Is that an example of confirmation bias?
That could be yes.
And confirmation bias is antithetical. It's against the scientific method. It's to be avoided, correct?
You would like to avoid it, yes.
Are you familiar with the term failure analysis?
Generally, you might need to define how you're using it for me.
Sure. So is failure analysis the enablement of a scientific examination of an alleged incident by beginning at the undesired consequences? Is that a fair use of that phrase?
I was thinking something different, like a piece of metal failing. I guess it could fall into that category.
Okay. And would you agree that the first question, or one of the first questions that are to be asked by a biomechanical engineer when conducting an analysis of, say, an injury is, how did this happen? Is that one of the first few questions that you ask?
No, that's usually the last question.
Oh, so for you.
So hold on a second.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Generally, what you want to do is gather data. You want to know what injuries there are, what evidence there is, like, for example, on the vehicles. And then the very last thing you want to know or define is, given all that information, how did it happen? So that's the end.
I think you may have misunderstood my question, sir. I wasn't talking about the method or the process. I was talking about when you get to answering questions, whenever that is in the process. Isn't one of the questions, and maybe one of the first questions, how did this happen?
No, that's not one of the first questions. One of the first questions is, where's the damage? What are the injuries? What's the evidence? What black box or text stream data do we have? What physical evidence was at the scene? So that is certainly not one. It is a question, but that question.
Now, you're still gathering all that evidence to find out what happened, though. That's the point of gathering all that evidence.
Question is at or near the end.
Isn't every one of the questions that you just mentioned part of the data gathering?
Correct. But,
Okay.
But when you're gathering data, you're always asking yourself questions along the way, like, what is this? Where did it come from?
But you would agree that for you, at least some point, it's how did this happen, correct?
Yes.
And don't you ask that question to come up with hypotheses?
I generally have many working hypotheses as I'm working on the case. And then as the evidence comes in, I'm applying that to my hypotheses and either accepting or rejecting.
Matter of logic or a syllogism. If you don't ask the question, how did this happen until the end? How do you then not get your hypotheses up front when under the scientific method, you should be having different hypotheses up front? How is it that you ask the how did it happen at the end and not go through hypotheses in the beginning? Can you help me with that logic?
Sure, I guess I misunderstood. Like I was trying to give you an answer to how it happened. So when you're answering how it happened, or you want to be able to answer that question, you want to make sure you've looked at the totality of the data, accepted, rejected, things as they came along, to be able to answer that final question, how did it happen? But along the way, like for example, a right eye laceration, you want to know how that happened. So you look for the evidence of how that may have happened.
So you would agree then that questions of how it happened, formulating and identifying hypotheses does and can happen toward the beginning of the analysis. It doesn't happen at the end all the time. Would you agree with that?
So the ultimate question of how did it happen happens at the end. The questions about the elements of what occurred to make it happen, those occur at the beginning, middle, all along the way.
You would agree that creating hypotheses occurs more toward the beginning than toward the end of the analysis. Is that correct?
There are probably more hypotheses in the beginning, but I am continually forming, looking at hypotheses, either accepting or rejecting them upon the evidence.
So you would agree that the creation of hypotheses does occur more toward the beginning of the analysis. You would agree with that?
There are more towards the beginning. The process occurs throughout the whole investigation.
Right. I'm asking about the hypotheses, sir. You would agree that the hypotheses occur more toward the beginning than the end.
Are saying different things.
But I want Alessi to look him in the eye and say, tell me that Mr. Brennan didn't say to you, prove to me that this car hit John O'Keefe in the arm and scratched up his arm and he fell and hit his head and died as a result of the car hitting him. I want you to tell me that Brennan did not tell you to do that. That's what I want to hear Alessi ask him. But I know he can't, because that will get objected to.
In the beginning, because you have more questions in the beginning. You continue to form hypotheses as the data presents itself. So you don't stop the formation of hypotheses. It's just as you get more evidence, you window down the questions.
Maybe I can just this last question and make it clear for you, sir.
Oh, it's clear.
You would agree,
He's being
not analysis, please.
Mhm.
You would agree that even though hypotheses can be created and changed perhaps all the way up to the end, you would agree that it's important in the analysis to create at least some hypotheses, plural, in the beginning, correct?
Yes.
To create these hypotheses, would you agree that those hypotheses should be tested?
So if you take the word testing to mean testing compared to testimony, compared to physical evidence, yes.
And when you test those hypotheses, isn't it often the case that particularly in your line of work, the one that most consistently produces the same injury will emerge as the mechanism of injury?
Dude, it's not a
I
trick
guess
question.
it depends on the scientific evidence behind it. Again, sometimes we get very unique injuries.
So my question, sir, is this.
Mhm.
Isn't it the case that when you have multiple hypotheses,
Well, hypotheses.
the one that most out of all of them, it's a relative thing, the one that most consistently produces the
right.
same injury emerges as the mechanism of injury?
What
Is that
the
a fair
fuck?
statement?
I think generally, again, it's on a case-by-case basis. You have to look at the science and the facts of what you're basing it upon. I think as a general premise, what you're saying is accurate,
Okay,
but there's exceptions.
fair enough. But as a general principle,
Sure.
with some exceptions, that's a fair statement, correct?
Yes, sir.
We're going to have several topics, sir, and what I'm going to try to do to make it a little clear is I'm going to say when I'm switching topics.
Oh, good.
So what I'd like to do now is switch topics.
Okay.
You're aware that the Massachusetts State Police has troopers who specialize in accident reconstruction, correct?
Yes.
And there are troopers within the Massachusetts State Police Collision Analysis and Reconstruction section whose sole responsibility is to engage in accident reconstruction. Do you know that?
I do not know that.
Do you know that there are troopers within the Massachusetts State Police Collision Analysis and Reconstruction section who engage in accident reconstruction?
Just based on what I've seen in this case.
Right, based upon what you've seen in the case, that's a fair statement.
And I just know that those people are doing it.
Badly.
Are you familiar with a Massachusetts state trooper named Joseph Paul, Paul? And you
Well,
know,
I'm familiar with his reports. I don't know the man.
okay, familiar with Trooper Paul through his reports in this case, correct?
Oh, y'all, I know what we can do for our next members only. We can watch Super Paul's testimony.
Right?
Correct.
And are you aware that he was assigned by lead investigator, former trooper Michael Proctor, to be a constructionist in this case on January 29th of 2022, as evidenced by that report or those reports of Trooper Paul? Do you know that?
Well, you put a lot of things in there. I know he issued a reconstruction report. I don't know who told him to do it. So the first party question, I don't know, but I did see a reconstruction report from him.
You were retained, and so do you recall, is it
But I wouldn't have paid attention to when he received an assignment.
do you know when the date of the first report of Trooper Joseph Paul in this case?
I can pull it up. I do not know off the top of my head.
You know that the date of the incident in question is January 29th, 2022, correct?
Correct.
Yet your firm and you were retained for this case by the Commonwealth 2.5 years after the incident in question. You were retained, your firm, on September 23rd, 2024. Is that correct, sir?
No, I believe we were retained a couple days before that.
A couple days. Okay.
Right.
So
Actually, yeah, I might be able to find out if you'd like me to look at the documents.
it's not all that important. You would say it's within a week of September 23rd, 2000. It was in September of 2024.
I believe it was in September, yes.
Right.
I would
So
want to double check.
that's 2.5 years from the date of the incident in question, if I did the math right, correct?
Oh, I never thought about it. Yeah, approximately.
And as we just discussed, and you stated on your direct examination, you have no dog in this fight, correct?
Correct.
On November 5th of 2024, your firm Aperture was paid $44,500 by the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office to conduct work that was at least similar to the work of Trooper Paul, correct?
I have no idea. I don't get the billing or the statements.
Do you recall whether Aperture has, well, do you believe Aperture is working for free in this matter?
Oh, no, I don't believe that. No,
So you
we're an
would,
engineering company. We bill for our time.
so you know that Aperture is getting paid for its work in this case, correct?
We are billing for our analysis work.
Well, you're not just billing, you're billing and getting paid, correct?
So I have not seen any of the payments. I would assume that we're getting paid, but I don't know that.
Sir, you are a senior vice president of Aperture, are you not?
I am.
You would know, wouldn't you, if your firm was not getting paid for work since September 23rd of 2024, wouldn't you?
No, probably not. Usually it takes, 9, 10, 12 months of not getting paid
Hey,
before
Carla.
the accounting department reaches out to me.
Exactly. So you've been on this for 2.5 years. So if it would take 9 months or 12 months, if you weren't getting paid, you would have been notified by that by now, correct? According to your own answer you just gave.
I've not been on this case for 2.5 years.
I'm sorry, sir. Let me go back to the question of payment.
Hold on. You said I've been on this case for 2.5 years. I was retained in September 17th-ish of 2024. So that's what, less than a year ago.
Understood. I'm moving on to the next question because I want to move away from that discussion and just
Okay.
go right to the billing. You, as you sit here today, do not have a recollection of whether Aperture has been paid. Is that your testimony?
It has nothing to do with recollection. I'm not part of that process. We have an accounting department. I don't have any involvement in that.
Are you, so is your testimony you have no knowledge about any contractual relationship between Aperture and the Commonwealth?
Oh, no. I was sent a contract by the Commonwealth to sign. So I'm aware of the contractual agreement, but the day-to-day or month-to-month invoicing and billing, I'm not involved in that.
Okay, so you're aware there's a contract between Aperture and the Commonwealth,
I signed it.
and you signed it. And wasn't that contract obligating the Commonwealth to pay for the services of Aperture? Isn't that the purpose of the contract, in part?
In part, sure.
Yeah, it's a legal obligation of the Commonwealth. Your firm does work, and the Commonwealth pays for it, correct?
That's the idea.
Right, and so you know about that contract because you signed it.
Correct.
Also, you testified on direct that there was a purchase of a Lexus exemplar for your testing.
Correct.
Who pays for that Lexus exemplar?
Aperture.
And is that then cost passed on to the Commonwealth?
No.
So you pay for the Lexus, you don't pass that cost on, correct?
So what we're doing is we paid for the Lexus. We're keeping it till the trial's over. We're selling
Speculate, I just wanted to see what the obligation was. So
the
if
obligation is the difference.
Exactly, so the obligation is the difference. Are you aware that on April 5th, 2025, the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office amended your contract? Are you aware of that, sir?
I am.
And isn't it the case that that amendment authorized the amount of $325,000 to be paid to Aperture? Isn't that what that amendment contract states?
I believe that's correct.
So the Commonwealth is obligated to pay at least $325,000. And is that correct?
That is you're asking me a legal opinion now about a contract. That is my understanding of how contracts work, but I'm certainly not an attorney.
And on top of that, are you aware that $510 for its work? Are you aware of that?
The second time you asked me, no, I'm not aware of anything we've been paid.
And as you stated yourself, those amounts reflect, as you say, less than 6